So today we jump into chapter 16 where we meet the situation where Sarai decides she thinks she needs to take things in her own hand. And so we see that in the first few verses, she says to Abram, here, take my maidservant and go make an heir. And in this time, a woman that could not bear children was very an embarrassing status. You know, it was an outcast. It was a thing of shame. And so she's like, okay, if I'm the problem, then I'm going to send my maiden. And so we see here that she sends her handmaiden, and it says from Egypt. So if we think about that, the way that she probably received this handmaiden was from the lie before, when Abram said that Sarai was his sister, and Abram received all those servants and those things. And so we see already that this is probably not the best situation, because these are one of these servants that they got in ill manner. And so she says, go have this, go see if you can have her way. And so many times, this is such a lesson in itself, is God made a promise. And we even just read in the last promise that he said, no, he'll come from your loins, Abram. It will come from you. And we think we have to step in and help God. And Sarai was like, fine, let me help God. It's been 10 years. This was almost 10 years after the initial promise, and it still hadn't happened. And you can imagine anybody would be weary in that. Anybody would want to give up and say, that's enough. And so Sarai said, let me help God. And how many times have we been guilty of that? Like, oh, God, I'm tired of waiting on you, so let me just do something. And so we have to remember to be patient. And when God tells us a promise, that we can have faith, even when we don't see the results yet, even when it hasn't come to pass yet, but he is faithful. And so we see that Hagar becomes pregnant. And of course, Hagar now says, this is a status, like, oh, you're the one. So God has chosen me as there, because they all knew the promise that Abram was going to be the son of many nations. So Hagar kind of got a little haughty. It's like, oh, so my son is going to be the heir of many nations. And of course, this upset Sarai. And so she treated her badly, out of jealousy, out of hatred of herself, out of fear, out of, all of these feelings. She treated her badly. And so Hagar runs away. And this is the best part of the story for me, because she runs away. She gets as far as this well. And, she probably has to kind of camp out there. They're kind of in a desert area, so water would be scarce. So she probably ran to the furthest she could where she knew there was be water. And then she's almost like, where do I go from here? And that's where God meets her. And I love it, because it says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness on the road to Shur. And he said to Hagar, Sarai's maid, where did you come from, and where are you intending to go? And she said, I'm wanting away from my mistress. And I love these two questions, because he knew the answers already. He knew where she was, and he knew the plan he had for her. And sometimes we have to come back to those own questions in our own life. Where did you come from? A mess. Where are you going? Nowhere. She didn't know where she was going. And it's almost God saying, so you need me, right? It's God insinuating and saying, you have a need for me as God, your father, to provide for you in this moment, because Hagar had nothing at this point. She couldn't return to Egypt because she had nothing there. She was a maidservant. She couldn't return to Sarai because she was hurting her, and she was, in her pride wouldn't let her go back. And she had nowhere to go because she had no money. She had nothing. She had nowhere to run to. And God met her right there. And I think about this because I think, what did Hagar necessarily do wrong to get to this point? And I think this is a fair point in life, that sometimes life just deals us a hand that is unfair, that is not always fun. I've been through some things that, you can justify yourself and say, oh, well, I've done everything right. I shouldn't be in this situation. It's not fair. And that's where Hagar was like, this isn't fair. I did what they told me to do. They wanted me to go have this baby with him. I did it. Now they're angry. Now they're treating me bad. And she's almost in her little pity party over here saying, I did everything right. I want to run away. This isn't fair. And how many times we catch ourselves there, and yet God meets us right there. The angel of the Lord came to her. He made her a promise. He said, you'll have a son. He'll be there will be many descendants after him. So he is saying, I have a future for you in me. If you obey me, if you go back to Sarai and submit yourself, I will bless you. And I love this, because this is where we find ourselves. We don't deserve it. We don't have any reason, but God still meets us here, and he says, I have a plan for you. I have a plan for your future. Obey me, trust me, do what I tell you to do, and your future will be great. And that's what he had for Hagar. And I love that because even in the midst of everything, God sees us. He could have just let Hagar run away. God could have left her out of the story. She could have never even been there to the start. There's so many things that God could have left Hagar out of the story, but he reminds us that he cares about the little. He cares about the one. He cares about the hurting. He cares about the broken. He cares about the Hagar sitting at the well saying, where am I going? And where have I come from? And so today I just want to encourage you. God sees you right where you're at. He has great things in store for you. And you can be like Hagar. And if you obey and put your trust in him, he will have a plan and keep you in the story.